Mesopotamian tablets refer to a land destroyed by the Great Flood. The Book of Genesis, the Koran, Mayan legends, the Epic of Gilgamesh, all speak of this once flourishing civilization, whose science, it is said, surpassed ours at the moment of its destruction. What became of Atlantis? According to the records of Egyptian priests, in one cataclysmic day and night, the entire continent sank into the depths of the ocean. Russian physicist Immanuel Velikovsky has suggested that Atlantis became the lost continent after a shift in the Earth's axis. Famous psychic Edgar Cayce believed that by misusing the powers of the mind and interrupting the evolution of the planet, Atlantis became the victim of its own perverted super science. And the people of Atlantis, what happened to them? Were they all destroyed? Or did some survive the Holocaust and migrate by sea and air to other lands? Did some Atlanteans retreat into the ocean and establish a magnificent undersea kingdom that still flourishes there today? Or did they, with their advanced technology, escape into outer space? And have they perhaps, since man first left records on cave walls, been returning in their spaceships to observe us as we build the new Atlantis? What evidence is there that man himself was not the sole architect of the Earth's great ancient structures? Did we indeed get a little help from our friends from space? The Great Pyramid of Giza is the height of a 40-story skyscraper. It's built with 2.25 million stone blocks, some weighing 24,000 pounds apiece. Blocks supposedly hauled hundreds of miles by slaves and beasts of burden. And what of the knowledge necessary for the construction of such a monument? We know now that the Great Pyramid was built facing true north in the exact center of the land map of the world. Not the known world of 2575 BC, but the entire world as we know it today. The only way its architects could have derived such calculations would have been to survey the Earth from high in the air, make a global map, project it flat, then draw meridians through the precise center of the map's land surface. Either that or the information was provided for them by someone else, someone capable of aerial reconnaissance. Some of the pyramids in Spanish America, land of the ancient Mayan, Aztec, and Toltec civilizations, predate even those of Egypt. Tiwanaku, the oldest city in South America, is said to have been constructed by a race of giants whose homeland was destroyed by a great flood. Archaeologists have discovered amazing similarities in architecture and artifacts in Egypt and at Tiwanaku. Similarities which have led some scholars to suggest that these two civilizations might have a common source. That perhaps Egypt was the principal colony of Atlantis in the Old World, while Tiwanaku was one of the drowned continent's colonial outposts in the New. The sacred books and folklore of widely separated lands all tell of days when gods visited this planet wrapped in clouds or conveyed by fiery chariots. Are the gigantic statues on Easter Island faithful representations of ancient astronauts or Atlantean giants? And what of Stonehenge, Neolithic computer of the Druids? The parallel is not far-fetched, for it would take an IBM computer to decipher the functions of this calendar monument, to predict coming eclipses from the complex alignment of the massive stone slabs, each marking a position of the sun and the moon. And more astonishing, the inner measurements of Stonehenge in England and the dimensions of the Great Pyramid in Egypt both indicate the precise number of days in a solar year, which seems to suggest that the architects of these distant structures had access to the same information. perhaps even worked from a master set of blueprints. The question is, why? Imagine, if you will, a single team of architects traveling from continent to continent, employing local people to construct navigational aids, great beacons that could be seen from craft orbiting planet Earth. Beacons still operational today. Certainly the most permanent evidence that advanced civilizations have been visiting this planet since ancient times may be seen in these time-defying monuments, a world apart. But let us consider what is happening in our skies today.
It was exactly 8:05 p.m. when Air Defense Command received word that a mysterious light was hovering low on the horizon just northeast of Rapid City, South Dakota. Radar operators at Ellsworth Air Force Base shifted their attention to the northeast quadrant of the sky and immediately picked up an unidentified target. Air traffic control quickly contacted an F-84 patrolling in the west, asked for an interception, and vectored the jet toward the UFO. A moment later, the jet's radar picked up the unidentified return and locked on. The plane was just 3 miles from its target when the light suddenly moved away with a fantastic burst of speed. The pursuit lasted for 120 miles, but the jet could not gain on the object. Finally, the pilot abandoned the chase. At ground control, the fascinated radar men watched the unknown object change direction and trailed the jet back to the airfield.
The evidence is overwhelming that planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial vehicles. In other words, some UFOs are somebody else's spacecraft. There are no good arguments against UFO reality if we consult the evidence.
Stanton T. Friedman, nuclear physicist and lecturer, has been consulting the evidence on UFOs for over 15 years.
One of the most extraordinary cases he has studied recently was that of Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, 2 shipyard workers from Pascagoula, Mississippi, who claimed that while fishing on the bank of the Pascagoula River, a strange craft emitting a bluish light descended and hovered just to receive the message which will be relayed to him. First, the subject is placed in a deep hypnotic trance.
Dýcháte klidně a zhluboka, hlubokým spánkem. Spíte nejhlubším spánkem.
In this experiment, it is essential that there be no outside interference, that the subject's mind be clear to receive the mental message that will be flashed to him. Now the experimenter, previously unknown to the sleeping subject, selects at random an envelope which contains the name of a spice. Pepper. He tastes it, and then mentally tries to convey the actual taste of the spice to the hypnotized subject. Now the scientist is saying to him, "What I taste, you also will taste. What is it?" And the reply comes almost immediately, pepper.
Ano, výbor.
Psychokinesis, the ability to move physical objects with the force of the mind, is also a subject of intense interest to science and to the military. Here in Leningrad, under strictest test conditions, talented sensitive Nina Kulagina makes the magnetic needle of a compass rotate by sheer mind energy. Russian scientists have found that while demonstrating this ability, the magnetic field surrounding Madame Kulagina's body is only 10 times less powerful than that of the Earth itself. Using this same energy, Madame Kulagina can also make non-magnetic objects like these matchsticks, shielded under glass, creep toward her across the table. In the Philippines, psychic surgeons are reportedly performing major operations on patients without using any surgical instruments and with no form of anesthesia or bleeding control. Yet the surgery appears to be painless and paranormal healing takes place almost immediately. The most publicized of the surgeons, Tony Agpoa, is removing a pituitary tumor from the forehead of a California businessman, Donald Westerbeck, who flew to the Philippines after doctors had warned him of the risks involved in traditional surgery. Here, in Westerbeck's own voice, is his description of the result of his operation.
When I came to the Philippines, I was very dubious about this entire process, but I felt that it would be a shame to have the operation first and find there was any truth to the Philippine phenomenon. Whatever comes out may or may not be the right kind of tissue. It may well be symbolic, but it is now 2 years since that operation, and the symptoms, which were progressing quite rapidly, have pretty much disappeared. I know that whatever happened in the Philippines had a certain effect on the progress of what was happening within my head.
You're here for a psychic healing. We have healers here who actually laying on of the hands. Now, whatever your ailment will be effective. In some cases sooner, in some cases a little bit later. You will be subject to psychic healing. You'll also be subject to psychic readings. They'll help us determine what your particular problem happens to be. The healers have this energy that flows through them, imparting a psychic energy. And this energy will flow to whatever part of the body.
I think that most people that really get into healing professions feel like they have some kind of healing ability. They may not know what it is, but I think they get into healing because they're kind of led into it. I mean, physicians, nurses, even chiropractors and others. Have you been doing any heat treatment or infrared or?
Nothing.
This observer is a licensed physician, an MD, one of the first to inquire into this unusual method of healing to see what it has to offer to his profession.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. No, there's no known physical cause for rheumatoid arthritis, and not really for the other kind, osteoarthritis either.
Our usual procedure is to take psychic readings.
This is a group of gifted sensitives who possess the extraordinary ability to diagnose a patient's illness by a method known as body scanning. They record their estimate of the possible illness by picking up vibrations directly from the sick person or by holding something belonging to her. Sometimes there is an actual transference of pain from the sick person to the diagnostician. The idea of an energy field or an aura surrounding the human body goes back many centuries. In biblical paintings, artists attempted to depict it by painting halos or aureolae encircling the heads of divine religious figures. Rather more recently, this NASA picture shows Apollo 12 astronaut Pete Conrad on the moon with a bluish glow around him. A leading American center of psychic research is the University of California at Los Angeles, where research psychologist Dr. Thelma Moss is experimenting with Kirlian Photography, a revolutionary technique invented by Russian scientists Semyon and Valentina Kirlian, which captures on photographic plates the aura or energy field surrounding both organic and inorganic objects. Dr. Moss, could you tell us about your research here at UCLA?
We've conducted about almost every area of research in parapsychology that includes telepathy, thoughts going from mind to mind, moving objects at a distance. Primarily now, we're extremely interested in energy fields around the body. But probably the most fascinating work that we're doing right now has to do with a photographic technique that was first discovered in the Soviet Union called Kirlian Photography, or more simply, electrical photography. And we've been able to get some pretty fascinating stuff on moving picture film using this technique, and I'd like to show it for you now, if I may. Okay, I'm going to turn on the film projector here, and we'll be taking a look at some of our work in motion pictures.
Due to the efforts of experimental researchers such as Dr. Moss, the technique of Kirlian photography may soon be of practical use in almost every area of physical science.
Inorganic objects photograph very differently from organic objects. Coins have a steady corona. We get the illusion that there is movement going around it, but the actual corona itself is static and its boundaries fixed, whereas human beings show a remarkably different effect. This is the right index finger pad, and we can see how brilliantly around his finger there are flares, and the corona keeps changing its pattern. We took a young lady and asked her if she'd get drunk. Here she is, 2 finger pads on her right hand before she's had anything to drink at all. And it is rather a placid effect. After 4 glasses of champagne, we see that she's become considerably brighter and the gaps have closed. And from the backs of her fingers are emitted sparks from time to time. After 8 glasses, she's in a much better state. From the rear projection of her finger pads, there are brilliant effects. Now we tried before and during kissing. This is the left and right, male and female, before kissing, and we can see that the coronas of both are rather dim, with a gap definitely existing between their fingers at the point where they are almost but not quite touching. These same subjects were photographed during a kiss. Their coronas have become considerably brighter and, in fact, are reaching out toward each other, perhaps the woman reaching out a bit more to the man than the man is toward the woman. Here we find an extraordinary example, which doesn't happen very often. Do you notice the red blob of light appearing between the 2 people? In anticipation, we like to think of the kiss to come. While kissing, the white and almost pink colors have become much more prominent, and it would seem the man on the left is perhaps enjoying the experience a little bit more than the person on the right.
Now, Dr. Moss has also observed through the Kirlian process the dynamic interchange of energy between a psychic healer and his patient. Apparently, after a healing treatment, there's a sizable increase in the width of the coronae surrounding the fingertips of the patient and a corresponding decrease in the healer's corona. Another fascinating aspect of Kirlian photography is known as the phantom leaf phenomenon. People who've had a limb amputated often say that they can still feel it, even complain of absent fingers or toes that itch. Now this, according to scientists, can be explained by the persistence of old sensory patterns in the brain. But for years, psychics have claimed that they can actually see phantom limbs still attached to the body. And now the Kirlian technique supports their claim. In Dr. Moss's laboratory, first they photographed an intact leaf, then cut away part of the leaf and photographed it again. For a short time, a phantom counterpart of pure energy remained where the leaf had been cut, making up a complete sparkling outline of the whole leaf.
One of the most dramatic things in Kirlian photography is the phantom leaf effect. Here is a leaf on the left side. It has been cut. We turn on the Kirlian equipment by placing an electrode, and here we see no phantom. Where the leaf has been cut, there is a kind of gap. However, by lifting up the electrode and replacing it very vividly, you can see the brilliance of the phantom effect. Extending beyond the boundary of the cut leaf, we can see flares coming out from various parts of the leaf and from its cut end. We cannot explain the effect. We simply know that it exists and that we can take it. About 30% of the time, we obtain this phantom effect.
Dr. Moss, have you investigated any other types of psychic phenomena?
Oh, I'm called on frequently. Psychotherapists sometimes bring their patients in because they've got some problems. One of the strangest areas of all is when we are called, I would say we get 100 calls a year, to find out about haunted houses. People think their houses are haunted. And we did one extraordinary investigation with interesting results of a haunted house here in Los Angeles for the American Society for Psychical Research.
Not far from UCLA is still another haunted house, inhabited by Mr. and Mrs. Robert Rice, their 5 children, and a ghost. Mr. Rice, when were you first aware that your house was haunted?
It was the holiday season of Christmas in 1969.
Did you see or hear something?
Well, it was more of a feeling than either sound or sight. It was one of these things that there was an extremely strong presence in the house, and I got up, I'd say it was 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and began to look around the house. I searched all the rooms expecting to find a burglar, but there was no one in the house, but a very, very strong presence.
Soon after this, Mr. and Mrs. Rice called in a psychic to find out if their house was indeed haunted. They were told that the ghost was that of a young architect who had become very disturbed and hanged himself upstairs in the attic bedroom.
Well, I was working in my studio downstairs. I'm a painter, and this individual had become such a familiar part of our family after a number of years that I more or less tried to communicate with him on working in this painting. I saw a man about 5'7", very thin, dark complected, wearing a white shirt rolled up to the sleeves, open collared dress shirt, dark pants and black shoes. There was an immediate effect of the painting taking shape. It was almost as if it were directed, although it didn't move my hand. It's not really a painting of him as he looks, it's more of a feeling of his personality.
The California Society for Psychical Research came to the Rice's house to investigate the case.
They went through the house and the different parts of the house, wherever they were, that they felt something, they would record that. They felt very strong feelings of him upstairs where he was supposed to have hung himself. There were unusual noises up and down the stairs, and it sounded like someone walking up and down the stairs. Also saw him in the same light, described him in the same manner that we had seen him.
Much of their conclusions concurred with what we had told them ourselves.
In view of the 5 children, there are absolutely no problems whatsoever. They're very aware of what's happened. It really doesn't bother them. They're used to the idea. We've never been afraid of him, and it's never bothered us living here, and we've been here for 5 years. Actually, we've kind of enjoyed having him as a silent member of the family.
I am Lucretia Black, and I am a witch. I practice witchcraft. I have always been a witch. I was born a witch, I was raised a witch, and my mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother were all witches.
What is a witch?
It's a psychic female who can project her energies and invade other people's subconscious minds, forcing them to do things they would not normally do. This is Witches' Mill in England, where in the Middle Ages, witches practiced their ancient art. There are witches who worship nature spirits and use plants and herbs to make potions for the sick. Witches who cast spells to dry up a neighbor's cow or blight his crop. Witches who wore charms and amulets to dispel the dark forces. In England, in medieval times, the church burned and hanged witches, blaming them when someone became sick or died. In France, Joan of Arc was burned at the stake because the church was afraid of her amazing psychic powers. Down through the ages, people with psychic ability have been falsely accused of being witches. And as recently as 1970, in San Jose, California, an ordinary Midwestern housewife was charged with practicing witchcraft.
For years, we have seen people lying on beds of nails or walking on sword blades, and we've thought it was magic or fakery. Now we're beginning to understand there is a thin line between magic and what we call mind over matter. And science has begun to study the people who perform these feats. Here in Hawaii, members of an ancient tribe walked barefoot through fiery coals without suffering pain or injury to their skin. Around the world, highly specialized rituals are performed that tug at the deepest unreasoning levels of the human mind. In Brazil, voodoo cults still flourish. Ceremonies are enacted where voodoo priests invoke the spirits of the dead to take vengeance on the living. Animal sacrifices, chanting, and beating drums incite the crowd to near hysteria. Such questionable occult ceremonies are not limited to the more primitive areas of the world. In San Francisco, as in other American cities, Satan is alive and well. And to prove it, here, with the full cooperation of the men and women involved, is an actual celebration of the Black Mass.
In nomine Dei nostri, Satanas Luciferi excelsi. In the name of Satan, the ruler of earth, the king of the world, open wide the gates of hell and come forth to greet me as your brother and friend. Grant me the indulgences of which I speak, for I live as the beasts of the field, rejoicing in the fleshly life. I favor the just and I curse the rotten. By all the gods of the pit, I command that these things of which I speak shall come to pass.
Blessed are the strong, for they shall possess the earth. Cursed are the weak, for they shall inherit the yoke. Blessed are the bold, for they shall be masters of the world. Cursed are the righteously humble, for they shall be trodden under cloven hoofs. Come on, Hail, Satan!
Some people still allow themselves to be seduced by the theatrics of dark and sterile practices. But most of us are reaching out to a new, exciting future. There is now a generation born to the knowledge that man can leave the earth. A generation prepared, even eager, for contact from beyond earth. And we're beginning to explore inner space to learn about the amazing psychic potential of the human mind. Where then do UFOs fit into our newly expanding awareness of the paranormal? Perhaps investigative reporter Ralph Blum, author of Beyond Earth, a book about man's contact with UFOs, could answer that question for us. Mr. Blum, what do you think about the UFOs?
I think we have to consider them as an example of Murphy's Law. Murphy's Law says that if something can possibly happen, it will. There doesn't seem to be much doubt that UFOs are happening, that they are real physical objects occupying both physical space and time. But the data also implies that UFOs may not actually fly here over vast, enormous distances, but simply materialize here, function as physical craft while in our atmosphere, and then dematerialize. I've interviewed Air Force pilots whose mission was to acquire UFO footage, men who've tracked and photographed UFOs and then just watched them vanish. Professor J.H. Bruning of the University of Mississippi has pointed out how closely a UFO experience resembles a psychic event. In both instances, something that, according to the rigid rules of science, shouldn't be there, appears and violates the known laws of space and time and gravity. Ghosts and UFOs seem to have a lot in common. Ghosts materialize, seem to float or hover above the ground, often communicate telepathically, then dematerialize, just like the reports of UFOs and their crews. These and other fascinating phenomena such as time loss, teleportation, and spontaneous healing are all associated both with occult and UFO experiences. And I'm inclined to agree with astronomer Alan Hynek, who suggested that we may be dealing with an intelligence that knows more about the physical world than we do, more about the psychic world, and is using it all.
Mr. Blum, I understand that you got down to Pascagoula, Mississippi, just 36 hours after Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker had their UFO encounter.
Yes, I did. It was the first time I'd seen for myself the profoundly disturbing effect of such an experience, not only on the two men, but on the entire town. Nothing that powerful had happened to Pascagoula since Hurricane Camille hit the Gulf Coast. And it was quite impossible to sit in the same room with Charlie and Calvin and not believe that something terrifying had happened to them.
They had me one on this arm like this, and on the other one, you know, they had my other arm like that. And I just seemed to lift up to the same height they were off the ground, and we just moved into the craft.
Now inside, how did they lay you out? Do you remember how it happened?
Yes. I didn't see any tables or chairs or anything in there. I'm not saying it wasn't in there because the light was almost blinding, but I didn't see any. And when they carried me inside, they seemed to just lean me back, you know. And this eye, well, I keep referring to it as an eye, it moved up in front of me about this close. And it started right at my eyes, looking me right in the eye. And it hesitated there for a few seconds, and it just started moving over my entire body. When they brought me from the craft along this area here, and they didn't drop me, you know, they just released me back to the ground. And I fell. I don't know why my legs were weak. I don't know why it was the fright or what it was, but I fell onto the ground. And that's when I seen Calvin. He's standing right over here in this area, and he was standing facing the river with his arms outstretched like that, just like he was staring at something.
A man in Missouri gave a paper on 546 landing cases from 34 countries. These all involve traces, that is, where some marks were left after the UFO took off. One place where this happened was on the Johnson farm in Delphos, Kansas, November 2nd, 1971. The strange marks in the middle there are a ring of soil affected by a UFO. There are a whole host of tests run on the ring. It's clear that something strange happened to the soil as far down as 14 inches deep. To give you an example of what happens to soil, the soil on the left was from that ring, obviously different in color and texture, and I might say from laboratory tests also different in composition from the normal soil on the right.
As long as UFOs remain in the air and perform impossible acrobatics, we can all enjoy arguments about who is hallucinating. And the military can tell the anxious citizens you did not see a flying saucer. That was Venus, or swamp gas, or migrating geese, or whatever. But all that changes when a UFO lands and aliens disembark. One of the most amazing and agonizing of such experiences involved a couple named Betty and Barney Hill.
While driving through the White Mountains of New Hampshire in 1961, the Hills lost several hours on the road. Unable to account for the missing hours and plagued by recurring dreams, they finally sought psychiatric help. While under time regression hypnosis, both Barney and Betty Hill relived being taken aboard a strange, glowing craft manned by beings not of this earth. While aboard, they were given an extensive medical examination and told that they would not remember what had happened to them. This is a model of one of the UFO occupants as described by Betty Hill under hypnosis. They were under 5 feet tall, with grayish skin, and communicated by some sort of thought transmission. In contrast, the creatures that floated toward Charles Hickson appeared to have been servo mechanisms or robots. The pointed spike ears prompted astronaut Brigadier General James McDivitt to suggest that they were probably some kind of advanced radar device.
Another version of what they look like, this is a drawing made by an artist, a composite based on hundreds of eyewitness reports. And obviously most landings don't get reported. This character's about 4.5 feet tall or so, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head and a body, slightly different facial features, obviously not like any of our friends down here on Earth.
However, there are definite parallels in behavior. They have Earth excursion modules, which behave very like our lunar excursion modules. Take our Apollo program. We have strange-looking flying craft carried on board a launch vehicle. They hover out in the boondocks on the moon, land, a couple of humanoid-looking creatures climb out, wander around, pick up rock samples, play games, then re-enter their craft, lift off, disturbing the soil behind them, rendezvous with the mothership, and zip off toward another planetary body. The same sequence, in fact, that have been observed here by UFO witnesses.
One of our pioneer astronauts was Brigadier General James McDivitt. In 1965, General McDivitt spent 4 days in outer space as command pilot of Gemini 4. General McDivitt, have you ever seen a UFO?
Yes. During my flight on Gemini 4 in 1965, I saw an object in space fairly close to our spacecraft that I could not identify. It looked to me like maybe the upper stage of another rocket. I tried to take some pictures of it, but unfortunately...
of science interfering with evolution.
Dr. Siegel, is it likely, in your opinion, that cloned man will become a reality in the near future?
The very definite possibility exists that in